Welcome to another episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. On this episode, Ms. Robin Alpern, Director of Training for the Centers for the Study of White American Culture, talks about the ways in which white supremacy culture damages white people in ways that the progenitors of white supremacy did not intend. This episode originally aired October 27th, 2021.
Well, once again, everybody, welcome to another Race Talk Revolution program with Lane and Eugene. Race Talk Revolution, of course, is a place where your voice matters. And we want to thank you for being here this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I want to say thank you and welcome to all of those who are new to the program today. This afternoon, our topic is the price of whiteness. And our speaker is Ms. Robin Alpern, who is a director of training at the Center for the Study of White American Culture. You know, as always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. And when we get to the Q&A section of the program, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand. We also want to remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as a species, uncover the not so hidden truth that we all want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. Therefore, when we do not understand or agree with what's being shared, we are committed to listening with respect, appreciation, and empathy. You see, it is our commitment that every person be encouraged, heard, and appreciated, because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. I want to introduce my co-host, the Reverend Lane Cobb.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So pleased to see you. Welcome. If this is your first time to Race Talk Revolution, welcome, welcome. Please come back. Let me introduce our guest for this afternoon. Robin Mallison Alpern is a white cisgender woman raised in the Religious Society of Friends, which is the Quakers tradition. She has a lifelong concern for racial justice and equity and works with anti-racism organizations in her home community and among Quakers, including cross-racial groups and white caucus groups. Her anti-racist vision and practice have been informed and shaped by a multitude of mentors and leaders, both white and of color. As director of training at Centers for the Study of White American Culture, Robin co-designed and co-leads a series of workshops on what white people can do about racism. Robin's focus is on engaging white people in work for racial justice and equity. She couples compassion for white people's humanity with an invitation to accountability and commitment to a life of anti-racist activism. Areas of expertise include countering white fragility with resilience, accountability and co-conspiracy, white women as architects of white supremacy, raising anti-racist children, replacing colorblindness with race consciousness, and costs of systemic racism for white people. Robin has co-presented workshops at the annual White Privilege Conference and has been a guest speaker at events and on podcasts. She was recruited by professors at Vassar College to help develop and teach an off-campus class for educators on how to talk about race with children. Robin has raised 4 anti-racist white children who teach her every day how to make the world a better place to live. Welcome, Robin Alpern. So happy that you're here.
Thank you, Lane, and thank you, Eugene. I really appreciate the opportunity and the, sorry, wrong button, and the invitation to speak. I love doing racial justice work, but I especially love it when I get to work with other people who are also working on that, as opposed to the folks who are trying to shut down the teaching of critical race theory, for instance. So really grateful to be here today with people who want to learn and talk and grow together.
Well, we're certainly happy to be here. Thank you for suggesting this topic, the price of whiteness. That's a big bite. And first of all, let me just say, I didn't know there was an annual white privilege conference. So that's interesting. And, maybe we can talk about that at some point. But before we get into our subject today, I'm wondering if you might give us a little bit of information about the Center for the Study of White American Culture and what is the work that you do.
Sure. And I want to just mention that people have trouble saying the name of our organization. And that's actually kind of a clue to the work that we do. The center was founded in 1995 by an interracial couple, and their inspiration for founding the center was the recognition that in our society, discussion and consideration of issues of race and racism usually focus on people of color, kind of as if they're the only people involved. And we don't talk about whiteness. And I met somebody recently who literally could not say the name of our organization because we don't talk about whiteness. We don't talk about white culture. We don't talk about white people. And yet, if it weren't for white people, we wouldn't have racism and white supremacy. So we are a multiracial, anti-racist organization. We focus right now on our workshop series. We have 7 or 8 different workshops for the public, all on different aspects of what can we do about racism. And they are especially an invitation for white people to come and learn more, because we know that the majority of white people have remained ignorant, whether willfully or just, not knowing how to do better. So we work hard to educate white people, but we also, our programs are designed and welcome people of all races to come and learn more and network together and make a difference.
Thank you for that. It's very, very important work, and it's work that has to be done with a real soul for change, right? A real commitment for change and meeting people where they are, which is, one of the things that I think that we forget sometimes when we really want to go out there and change some things. We realize we need to meet people where they are. And a lot of times where they are is just not ready.
That's right. Pretty much the people who come to our workshops have, begun doing the work. They're not real brand new, but people are in all different places, and you can't push them or force them. And at the same time, this oppression is destroying who we are, really. To come to my topic, it's not only harming and damaging and destroying people and communities of color, it's also doing real damage to white people. And so that's something I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, please.
Okay, then. Well, so I want to start by acknowledging W.E.B. Du Bois, who hopefully everybody here has at least heard of Du Bois. He was a Black sociologist and civil rights activist. And in 1935, in his book called Black Reconstruction in America, he wrote about a psychological wage that he said white workers receive from white supremacy, a psychological wage. And more recently, there was a book published called The Wages of Whiteness. And I think the phrase that we use nowadays, white privilege, is kind of a similar concept. So in preparing to talk today, that was kind of in the back of my mind. There's the wages of whiteness, the privilege, the goodies of whiteness. And what I want to look at is the other side of the coin, which I'm calling the price of whiteness. And I really owe it to the Center for Study of White American Culture, which I'm going to call CSWAC. That is our fond acronym. It's really due to CSWAC that I even learned to think about costs for white people. We have a foundational workshop where we designed an exercise to help the white people in that workshop begin to grapple with that this is hurting white people too. And in the exercise, we read off a series of ways that white people are harmed by racism, and we ask them to toss a coin. We supply them with coins, and then we ask them to toss a coin for each one of those costs that they have experienced. And it's a really deep exercise. Sometimes people cry. Most of the time they have never thought about this, and I hadn't either before we designed that workshop, put that together. But since then, I have been grappling a lot with this issue of how white supremacy hurts white people too. Before I get into it any further, though, I want to give some caveats, because especially speaking as a white person, I think that sometimes people are imagining all kinds of things when I talk about racism harming white people. So I want to lay out some things real transparently. One is that I am certainly not talking about reverse racism, which doesn't exist. Hopefully everybody in the room is aware that racism is a system. It's a one-way system that privileges white people and oppresses people of color, and it doesn't ever reverse. We need to be clear that although I'm saying that racism hurts white people definitely are still also at the same time receiving privilege and benefits and resources and the goodies of white privilege. Also, I'm not trying to compare the harm that's done to the two groups, white people and people of color, right? We're not engaging in any oppression Olympics here and saying, oh, white people got it so bad. You can't compare. It's very clear that who is paying the heaviest, most direct price is people of color. So that's just the facts. Also, I wouldn't want this conversation to ever stray into, oh, us poor white people. Oh no, we're being hurt. So, oh, poor us. Now let's put all the focus on the poor white people, right? That's not where we're going. And finally, a caveat or related point is that because white people are damaged by white supremacy, we have a responsibility to recognize and learn about that damage and do what we can to heal it. And the speaker last week, Wikesa Madzumoyo, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, he talked a little bit about the necessity of white people doing that work, because, we need it for our own health and humanity, but also when we don't do the work on our own woundedness, then we are very easily able to turn around and impose that woundedness in the form of oppression on others. There's that expression nowadays, hurt people, and this is exactly what we see. So if you're here today and listening to this, you're going to be leaving with, if you didn't already have it in place, you're going to be leaving with a commitment for those of us who are white to learn all you can about how you've been wounded and to do what you can to address that and heal from it. I could take a question if there's a question, but otherwise I will just charge right on.
Nope, I think you should charge right on.
Okay, all right, great. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what wounds. And I'm going to go back early to start that. I'm going to talk about our European roots. Again, talking about white people. So our roots in Europe, and I am not a historian, but there's many, many sources where you can look up what I'm about to talk about, because I'm just going to do a thumbnail sketch. In Europe, hundreds of years ago, and people were not called white people then, so the European people were tormented and tortured and oppressed in so many ways. There were the witchcraft trials, which lasted over 100 years at the peak, and which, tortured and imprisoned and killed millions of women and men as well. There was the enclosure movement, which was the massive forcing of the peasants off the land that they used to live on communally and from which they made their living, and forced them off that land so that the aristocracy could have it. And where were the peasants supposed to go? They went to the cities, which became overcrowded and, full of disease and so on. And many of them fled for their lives here to this country. There was the rise of patriarchy and capitalism, both of which destroyed the way of life that had been enjoyed by Europeans for tens of thousands of years before that. There's a brilliant piece by Resmaa Menakem, who is a healer and therapist. Many people know of his work. He wrote a brilliant short piece called Healing Your 1,000-Year-Old Trauma. And it talks brilliantly in a nutshell about this horrible history of what happened to the masses of people in Europe hundreds and thousands of years ago, which resulted in a very messed up people arriving on the shores of this continent. So again, this is not to excuse or say, oh, poor them, but it's just to understand that this is part of the history and the reality and the ground of being for white people. And then once those abused and traumatized white people straggled over here to this country, then they were treated to further abuse and traumatization in the form of the Americanization programs. These were the programs that were supposed to kind of beat your old culture and language and heritage out of you and transform you into this new white American person. And, so this resulted in irreparable loss of religious roots, ancestral heritage, family connections. I warned Lane and Eugene that while I was preparing my notes for this talk, I found myself getting pretty emotional. And, I know that I, for much of my life, have lacked a sense of place, where I belong in the world, because of that history of what happened to my people in being cut off from our roots and required to melt into the supposed melting pot of white people in the United States. I actually want to mention a course that I took a few years ago. There's an organization called White Awake, which focuses also on the work of white people in doing anti-racism. They have a workshop called Roots Deeper Than Whiteness, and another one on Before We Were White. And it wasn't until I took part in those workshops that I understood that I am an indigenous person of Europe, that, that I also have roots. I have a place that I came from. And I just can't even express how much that matters to me. And I think that it is the lack of that sense of grounding and place that has been hugely damning. Oh, that's not what I was going to say, but let's go with it. Damaging for white people. We may not be conscious of it. Pretty sure a majority of white people are not conscious of the ways that we have that lack of sense of self and place and belonging, but you can see the results of it. Okay, I'm going to take a moment to just kind of let my emotions settle a little bit.
Fine. You know, what you're pointing to really is that it's very, because these same things that you're saying about white people are also being said about Black people, right? The separation from home, the destroying of culture, right? The forced assimilation, right? To assimilate and to then hopefully ascend to something, right? Is extraordinarily damaging. And so to go through the world unconscious about the costs of that process is, you're right, it is damaging, and we don't get to it unless we are able to acknowledge what has happened to us. It's very difficult then to come together with somebody else and have that same discussion and meet them where they are, and to hold space for other people's healing. We have to heal ourselves first. So I appreciate what you're saying. I know there are a lot of people that would probably say, what is this lady talking about? Right? What is this lady talking about? White people are fine. And right, this is one of those places where we recognize that the lived experience of everyone, conscious and unconscious, this is all important when we're talking about raising us up as raising our humanity, right? So just thanks for doing this work. It's tiring, it's emotional. So thank you.
Thank you, Lane. I appreciate your drawing a parallel between experiences of people brought in captivity from Africa and people who were not brought in captivity, but in many cases were forced to flee and lost their homeland in a similar way. Again, I do want to make sure that people don't hear me saying, oh, so therefore, oh yeah, we had it bad too, so what are you,
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. No.
I know you're not saying that. I just want to make sure nobody's hearing that in what I'm saying. Just acknowledging that there are some similarities. And honestly, one of the things that is interesting to me is the ways that karma is at work here, and what goes around does come around. I often see ways that white people are being harmed that are similar to the kinds of harm that we have visited on people of color. And so isn't that interesting that it's now biting us in the ass? That's how it works. Okay, I wanted to lay out for you just a little bit of more detail of, well, what does it mean that there's a price of whiteness? And I'll just say transparently, this is still a pretty new area for me. I'm really excited that although I've been talking about the costs of racism for white people for several years now, doing my work at CSWAC, it's recently that people have started to publish some research that is really useful. White people love facts and statistics. That makes it real when you got facts and statistics and numbers, right? So, and I mean, that's true for me too. It gives me something to hang on to. So I'm going to lay out some facts and statistics for you. First, an article that was published, excuse me, in the New York Times in 2020 by a professor of economics named Lisa Cook. She wrote an article called "Racism Impoverishes the Whole Economy." Racism impoverishes the whole economy. And by the way, this is really the larger point that I'm talking about today. I am focusing on the price of whiteness, but it is part of the larger context that this thing is hell for everybody. This racism, this white supremacy, it's bad for everybody. So she says it's bad for the whole economy. And she talks about the studies that she did on the loss of creative input to the economy due to violence between 1870 and 1940. She's looking at that specific period. And she did these calculations about the people, the Black people who were subjected to violence, riots, lynchings, Jim Crow laws during that period. And she calculates it out to the amount of loss to our economy, because people who could have contributed immeasurably to our business world, in untold ways, what they would have had to contribute to our society and our economy, and which was lost as a result of racial violence. More recently, people here may already know about Heather McGhee's work. She's my new hero. I love what she is doing. She's also an economist. She's a Black woman who's an expert on economic and social policy. And she published a book called The Sum of Us. And the subtitle tells it all. The subtitle is What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. So just a couple of quick things from her book. It's a really fat book, and I haven't read it all yet, but in the town where I live, we have been working hard on the housing crisis due to gentrification, all of the Black and brown and poor people who are being forced out. We've been working on that. So I went right to her chapter on housing, and she talks about a case study in Chicago that asked, what is the cost to this city of their segregated housing? And the case study found that there were billions of dollars lost in terms of income and lives and life potential. They found that segregation cost their workers $4.4 billion in income. So this is, and she didn't break this out in terms of race, but obviously a lot of those workers are white people too, who are also losing income. She said that 83,000 fewer Chicagoans are completing a bachelor's degree, and 78% of those people not completing a bachelor's degree are white people. And if you can believe it, she even pointed out that integrated communities, so not Chicago, but integrated communities are less polluted than segregated ones. And this has got to be true for some other conditions and phenomena as well, because she explains that the reason for that is that when there's a segment of the community that is marginalized and separated off, then the entire community is less able to band together and demand that pollution be decreased. And so, that's got to be true for other measures as well, that we are less effective at banding together as a community and demanding good stuff. And so the white people in those communities are also losing the good stuff. Anybody who knows Heather McGhee probably knows one of the stories she tells the most, that is just mind-boggling to me. She talks about how in the 50s, I think it is, there was a huge movement to close public swimming pools because they were being legislated to be desegregated. And rather than desegregate their pools across the country, white people shut down their swimming pools. And this included, I never heard of this before, but apparently there had been a period in the 30s, 40s, where they built pools that literally were large enough for thousands of people. I had to read that several times because I didn't believe it. My little pool has, maybe 100. But anyway, it was a big deal to have these public swimming pools that were federally funded. And those got shut down one after another. So white people in those communities, they would rather swelter through the summer and watch their kids swelter through the summer than share the pool. And, swimming in a pool, that's definitely a privilege. That's not like a life and death matter, is what I want to say. But it just gives you an inkling of how much white people have been willing to cut off our own nose to spite our face rather than be human beings sharing the planet with other human beings. So just a little bit more on this. There are some articles that I put in the resource page for this that give you more details about specifically how white people are paying the price for our evil ways. Diane Goodman has an article where she breaks out what are psychological costs, what are social costs, moral and intellectual costs, material and physical costs. We could really kind of sit here all day and detail what are the ways that white people are harming ourselves and then turning around and passing that harm on to others. I think maybe I will take a pause there. Before we end today, I do want to talk some about what are some ways that white people can work on this and remedy it, but I maybe want to have some more conversation before we get to that part.
I think that's great. I know that Eugene's going to take over, but I want to find out, do you want me to put the Diane Goodman book in the chat? Do you have a title for that book?
Oh, it's not a book. So it's an article, and I think I gave it to you for the resource page link.
Okay, so
I'm pretty sure
it's
there's a link to it.
That's okay. It's been sent out. All right.
Yeah,
thank you. Just making sure.
Yep.
Hey, Robin, I have a question for you. In what way specifically, or how does racism harm white people?
Well, I've been trying to lay out some ways, but I know it's a little hard to wrap our minds around this. So I'll just start with some personal examples. I am a person who really loves people. I love to be with people. I love to do stuff with people. I love to go places with people and so on. Due to my upbringing in a predominantly white town where there was no questioning or challenging about segregation and racism, I am a person who, to this day, I often experience discomfort and feeling out of place when I am with people of color. That's a general thing, once I get to know somebody and so on, that can change. But I don't have the easy sense of we know each other, we can be friends, we can be good together. And that to me is crippling. It's not all right with me to not be able to just feel like a normal human being simply because I'm in the presence of a person of color. So that's, I guess, an emotional, psychological cost.
Yeah.
I think, Robin, one of the things that when David Billings and folks have said is that racism dehumanizes all of us, right? It really saps our humanity, and that's a cost, right? It is an emotional cost, and we don't really know what's going on. And I think just because white people are benefited by racism, like it's just they don't know they're necessarily benefiting from racism, but they have a better quality of life than people of color, right? It doesn't show up, right? Mm-hmm. That cost doesn't show up like it shows up for people of color, right? But but the damage is done, and it blocks us from. I think someone put in the chat. Seja, I believe, thank you, said it kept her from seeing that other people could be like her, right? To see others as humans, people who aren't like you, that's just a person. They're just like me, right? That's a cost. We cannot, it limits our ability to have authentic relationships with other people, and we lose our own connection to who we are. As well, right? And we know this, right? Your soul knows that there's something wrong, right? And that's and so that's a spiritual cost. Thank you, Anne just said the damage is on a soul level.
Right. Yeah.
I'd love to ask about Tyrone's question, but go ahead, because I'm talking over Eugene and Robin.
Oh no, it's okay. I was just going to say thank you for that personal example. And I know that you were giving, other examples, but I wanted to get something that was specific, right? Because after you said that, it reminded me of a discussion I was having with somebody. I don't know if it was on Race Talk almost a year ago or something else I was doing, and this woman who was white she was talking about an experience that she had coming out of a market, and a black man was walking in, and he allowed her to walk out first, and she said thank you, but her come from was like that she felt bad that she allowed him to allow her to walk out first. You know, and one wanted to go back to him and say, you didn't have to do that. So I can understand that that's how racism harms white people. Racism harms everybody across the board. Yeah. Go ahead, Lane.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I still want to just reiterate, I might say this too many times, but maybe you can't say it too many times, that although it harms everyone, I want to be really clear,
Right.
It doesn't harm people
Right.
in the same way.
Right.
Just want to say that again. I also
Right.
want to refer back to something that Wakesa said last week about the harm done to me and to my fellow and sister of white people by being cast as the superior ones. That's incredibly bad for people, right?
Right.
Nobody here who has children would want their child to think that they are better than everybody else. You know, they're going to become the bully on the playground. And guess what? That's who white people are. And that does not feel good for me as a human being who, again, you know, I'm about peace and love and let's have a good time on this planet. But I'm walking around all the time in this body and this mind and this set of emotions and attitudes that keeps telling me I'm better. And so every time I encounter someone else, and by the way, it doesn't actually stop with, let me put that a different way. It impacts my relationships with white people too, right? This is just so embedded in my psychology as a white person that it's always got to be about better than, and you know, who's got the upper thing. So that screws up my relationships with white people as well. But where I most notice it is with people of color. I've been tracking for years what Wakesa called injected, I remember he said injected
yes, racial oppression
yes. For people of color. I thought that was really interesting. So I have been using for myself the term internalized racial superiority. I have to think about whether it would be right to call it injected. But anyway, I've been just tracking for years what goes through my mind when I encounter people of color. And just, you know, a simple example of there are a lot of Latina people in my town, maybe a third of the population, and from South America. And I saw on a street corner 3-4 young women who were chatting, and one of them was holding a baby. And I immediately thought, why do they have so many children? And this to me is horrifying because I was not raised to have that kind of prejudice. My parents never brought me up to think that way about people. It's not the facts about people, but that has been injected, I guess, to use Wakesa's term. And I think that this is one of the huge costs, one of the prices that white people pay, is that we've had our, are we allowed to use language on this show?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay. We have had our minds fucked. We really have. I cannot think what I really want to think. Uh-oh.
No, you are good. You're good.
Too
You're
much
good.
language?
No, it's great. It's perfect. It's perfect.
I feel it's the best word, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have, and that is a serious price to pay. Again, I get my privileges and I get my goodies and I get my resources in exchange for that. But honestly, I would really rather have my humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. This is good stuff, Robin. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I know we've got people who want to ask questions. We have questions about, doesn't capitalism flourish under the banner of racism? And I know that capitalism and racism, you know, I mean, they're joined together. And right, the tunnel vision of that is that when you let more people contribute to the system gets better, right? If you let people compete that way, we will all benefit, right? When you keep a whole, as you were saying, you keep a whole group of people out, they don't get to contribute anything, then you're left with recycling what's there, and the system gets cheated, and we all get cheated, we really lose so much opportunity to all benefit from keeping people excluded. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would definitely agree with you that capitalism is in bed with racism, is in bed with patriarchy, all three of them, and probably more that I have just not learned about yet. They are very much intertwined, working together, supporting one another.
And that's the important part about learning the history, right? Because when
Right.
you learn the history, you cannot deny it. It's like you see it, right? You can't deny it. And this is where, you know, there are people who, Tyrone was saying, what do you do when there are white people who can't even admit that racism exists? You know, it's like, well, you can't make somebody look at it, but what you hope is that you keep putting that facts in front of them and hope that bringing people, inviting people to get educated about it, because it is just so clear what the intentions of the founding fathers and so forth and so on, what the intentions over time throughout the years have been in terms of preserving white supremacy, patriarchy, the whole nine. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, so that, I don't know, were you going to go somewhere else, Lane?
No, it's okay. No. You said you wanted to talk about what white people can do to dismantle.
Well,
Is that where
not
you want to
yet.
go?
We're not going to get there
Okay.
yet.
Not yet? Oh, okay.
Well, a little
Well,
more
go for it.
conversations.
We're gonna, all right. So I'm gonna invite
Um,
people though to start putting their hands up. Go right ahead.
Okay, I want to say one more thing, and then I see some hands are up. Just when you said about, what did you say? It just reminded me about, so what's going on with CRT across the country, and how white people are so resistant to learning the history and to allow their children to learn it. And I just know that what's underneath that, there's many things going on, but part of what's underneath it is the vast reservoir of shame and guilt. And, you know, this again is part of the price, is that we're up here on top of the world. And even if we don't know it, which I think a lot of white people don't really know, how did we get here? How did we stay here? But we do know, you know, spiritually, at the core of ourselves, we know I did not get here by my hard work. I did not get here because all of those other people are lazy bums. You know, I got a hand up for hundreds of years to get me here, and that's not right. And I feel ashamed and guilty because of that, but I'm going to keep that under wraps. You know, I don't want to feel that stuff, and I sure don't want my children to feel it. And so I would rather that children of color and their families continue to have to deal with all the damage and wreckage and their horrible feelings, rather than me do the work of finding out what did we do? What did white people do? What are we doing? What have I done? What have I not done? That, you know, that's hard work. It's not fun, not pleasant at all. You know, you can have really shitty time working on racial justice, but at the end of the day, and this was something you mentioned at the beginning, Lane, you know, at the end of the day, my own experience has been, I wouldn't have it any other way. My life is so much better now from, you know, doing what I can to clean up my own mess and try to get my people to clean up our mess. It's the best life.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. I know there's three hands up.
Good. This is really good stuff. I have questions too, but I'm going to open it up to the floor. But really fast, if you want to raise your hand, you know, you go down to the bottom of the screen to the reactions button, click on the reactions button, and then click raise hand. If it's not there, and then you can go to the participants button, second from the left, find your name, and then hit those little three dots on the right-hand side, and you can find it there. And pretty much that's about it, okay? Or then you can always do this, right? If you can't find those two. All righty, so let's start this Q&A off with Tyrone Cozy.
Good morning, Robin. How are you?
Hi, Tyrone. I'm good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I would say that of all the people who spoke so far, all due respect to my hosts, this might be one of the most relevant experiences, because you go into the heart and the core of it. So I guess part of my question is, a statement in the question is that there's another type of privilege that I notice among white people, and that's the privilege of social amnesia. To be able to let's just put that, I forgot about it. I'm not personally doing anything that is racist, but, everything else that's in the past. And I think that's at the root of this, or part of it, not the root, part of this wave of pushback. And there's a huge wave of pushback. If you even have the stomach to look at Fox News, right, you will see that that's an ongoing thing. Critical race theory is just used as a trope, And so I would love to see white studies in every damn college in this country. I think it should be a requirement. What's the term? The essential class you would take? It needs to be that, So I'm just wondering, how do you wrap your head around the fact that so many people don't even want to agree with a premise that this even exists, that they're plugged into the fact that many generations work their asses off their entire life. What do you mean that, I'm privileged? And so I think that's an element. And so I'd like to know your thoughts about how do we get more white folks, including all these beautiful people on this call, to be able to reach out to others who don't even believe in the premise and see what we can do to open up the eyes a bit. That's a long question, but.
Yeah, well, it made sense. And I think I remember pieces of it, at least, the social amnesia. So I think that that's actually built in as a very important part of systemic racism, is the teaching to white people our whole lives in every possible way that we are innocent, we are good, we are just fine, as maybe Lane might have used that phrase, or we are just fine. That's just the facts. It is baked into us that we white people are good and innocent and just fine. And so what is happening now is that there's a threat to crack that shell. Right? There's a threat that we're going to find out that actually the emperor is naked. And that feels really scary and bad to a lot of white people. We don't want to find out that we are not innocent and we are not so good as we said we were. So, that brings all that pushback. And I wish I knew really the answer to your question, how do we reach those people? I'm going to be honest and say that I mostly have stayed out of spaces where there's those discussions going on, because I find it really hard to deal with people at that level of denial. That's just really hard to deal with. So I kind of prefer to work with the choir like I'm doing here today. However, it is true that one reason I have worked so hard at understanding about the costs of racism for white people is that it seems to me that if you can't get white people to care about people of color, which to me is the obvious reason why you would fight racism, is because look what's happening to people of color. But if you can't get white people to care about that, maybe you can get them to care about the harm it's doing to them. So, how is it harming your child to continue being fed this mythology about the founding of our country, and for your child to not really get it about why things are the way they are now, which if you don't understand the history, like somebody said earlier, you won't understand what's going on now. So that's bad for our children. How can they be citizens participating in a democracy if they don't even know what's going on?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have Cody, and then Felicia, and then Vicky. Hi, Cody.
Hi.
Hi, Cody.
This has been wonderful. Thank you, Robin.
Oh, thank you for listening.
Yeah. I noticed in the intro, it mentioned the idea that white women were the architects of white supremacy. And I know that's a whole discussion, but I would love to hear a nutshell if you have one.
Okay, I will try to do a nutshell. And it shouldn't say they are the architects. They definitely had partners who were white men. But I have put together actually a 7-session workshop called the Arc of White Womanhood, where we look in excruciating detail at how white women from the beginning of the United States have been deeply complicit with building and perpetuating white supremacy. And just, I don't know, some really quick examples. In the suffragist movement, white women pushed out, abandoned, betrayed women of color and made sure to get the vote for ourselves, knowing that when women won the vote, it really was only for white women, because in the South, they knew already how to prevent Black people from voting. Other examples. Oh, well, so going back earlier, there's this amazing book by, I think it's Stephanie Rogers Jones, I think. They Were Her Property. Horrifyingly detailed history of all of the white women who owned African people. It's not just that they were the wives of the white men who ran the plantation. They were the white women who made sure, at a time when women were not allowed to own property, white women found their way to own human beings. And they were not nice to the human beings that they owned just because they were women. So that's just a couple of really quick examples. There's a lot of information.
There's the whole Southern Belle thing, you know, and,
yes.
And yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And sorry, and I don't mean to suggest that this is only historical. There are a lot of books actually coming out right now about white feminism and how white women in the feminist movement are turning our backs on and betraying women of color. So that's a whole another area.
Yeah, still.
Yep, right now.
Whew.
Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Cody. Dr. Felicia Williams-Cozy.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm really appreciating the things that you're bringing to light here. And I think there's a way we can assume that this younger generation is more awake, is more alert, is more educated, is more active in standing against racism. And I just had an experience last week with a student at Stanford. And, you know, Stanford is among the most, you know, to get into Stanford is a sign of privilege just to walk in the door, where it was the week to talk about diversity. And one of the white students was struggling with how to speak to a woman of color in his, he's a coach for a group. And so we did a role play, and he said something that was really quite inappropriate. And a couple of the women in the group rolled their eyes. And he spiraled down into this place of shame and of that must have been stupid. And to watch him go into that place of shame and guilt and all of that. And we let him sit there with it rather than doing the let's rescue him and pull him out. And he spoke to other professors in the business school, and he wrote in his journal about it. And fortunately, he did come to a place of humility and wanting to understand, but it was a bit shocking to everybody else that someone could be someone who seemed to be so aware could have such an emotional reaction to being caught in ignorance. And so as we talk about how it's been taught generation to generation to generation, that level of grief, that level of shame that rises to the top when people have to face how they've been privileged, how they've walked in a way that has people automatically see them as superior.
Thank you, Felicia. I do want to say that we have to be really cautious about thinking that the younger generation has got this. That's kind of the myth. But one of the workshops that we do at CSWAC is raising anti-racist white children, which actually includes information about raising children of any race to be anti-racist. But again, we're focusing on white folks. And we go into some of the research there that shows that unfortunately, millennials and younger are just as racist as your grandmother, in one person's phrase, but they've learned to navigate it differently. They've learned not to use the wrong language, and but under pressure comes out. So to the other part that you were saying, personally, I'm a big fan of grief. I think it's really important that white people come to that place of having feelings, because I don't know if, well, it's a feature of white culture that we're not supposed to have feelings, right? Those are basic and primitive, and you should get rid of them. So to just even be able to be aware of our feelings around this, but also to come to that place of realizing, oh my God, I have lost. I have given up, had stolen from me, mislaid, forgot about so much that is the core of who I am, and it's gone. Maybe not forever, but right now. So, personally, I think that's a good thing when a white person comes to that place of grief. And
Absolutely.
thank you for your story.
And I just want to say it turned out to be something very, very powerful for everyone in the group, for people of color who now had a place to speak up, for white people who had a space of listening and actually learning those skills. So I just want to say there is hope, and there's a lot of work to do.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. I'm not surprised to hear that, when somebody got real and got human, that, like you say, that made space for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Felicia. Vicki, and then Robert.
Thank you. So when I heard white women were the architects of white supremacy, I went, ouch. I am in seminary right now, and I've been really studying the religious roots of what we're talking about. And the recent one in regard to indigenous people as well, in 1493, when Columbus went back to the Pope and said, whoa, there's people in this continent. And the Pope said, well, if they're not Christians, do whatever you want to them. And then when I read the book White Too Long by a white male Southern evangelical who traced back the roots of this whole supremacy thing to the Christian faith, and was like, whoa, well, maybe that's why some people are harder to face it, because of, if they had to really look at it, there are some people in positions of religious influence that have set up the supremacy thing and this whole pecking order that we have to, like white women do, find their place in the pecking order unless they're willing to step out of the whole competition thing. And when I heard that you had a background with the Quakers, it's like, wow, that religion itself has always, from what I understand, always been open to equality. So I don't know if that's part of what you're working with as well, or what you would tell us as people who are very religious cling to this idea that God ordained some to be above others.
Yeah, well, if you remember, Manifest Destiny was the mission of white people early in this country, that God ordained us to be here and to be in charge. And you referenced the doctrine of discovery that also said that European people had the right to seize the lands and enslave the peoples wherever they went. So I left that out of the unholy trinity earlier of racism, capitalism, and patriarchy. But unfortunately, yes, religion has also played a huge role in this. And to come back to white women again, because women have so often been, at least in our culture, so central to the church. White women have done a lot of the damage. I'm sorry to say, as a Quaker, a lifelong Quaker, I have been doing my homework there too, and finding out that although people, if they've heard of Quakers, they know that Quakers ran the Underground Railroad. Well, the fact is that Black people created and ran the Underground Railroad, and there were white Quakers who got involved, no question. There were white Quakers who lost their lives in the process, but there were also plenty of white Quakers who were opposed to abolition, and who kicked out the abolitionist Quakers. And unfortunately, our history is really not all that great. We required Black people who came to our meetings to sit on the back bench. We wouldn't let them become members. And it continues to today. There's a lot of strife in Quaker communities right now over the race and racism that's embedded in our faith community. That said, I do feel as a Quaker that because we have the principles that we have, such as equality and justice and truth, that those are kind of a bedrock that I can always come back to and say, well, now wait a minute, you know, are we honoring our principles and our faith in this way? So I feel like I have something to grab onto when I need to have courageous conversations with other Quakers. I know there's at least one other Quaker in the room here today. I saw that earlier.
Yeah, good. Just real fast on racism and religion, it's interesting when you think about it, right? Where other cultures around the world, their deity, their God looks like them, right? Except for the African Americans or the African American race. It is interesting that, Jesus was made white, and that played such a huge role in the slavery. It played a huge role on making that system okay, because God said, yeah, interesting. We're going to go to Robert, and then I have another question for you, Robin. Mr. Harris.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit mysterious here, but so I want to appreciate the work that you do, Robin. But as someone who worshiped with Quakers for over about a 40-year period, and was involved with some work, I'm out here on the West Coast, on the left coast here, with attempting to do anti-racism work with the community is very supportive. One thing that was suggested to me was that class maybe gets intertwined with racism and makes it difficult for Quakers and maybe other white people too. And it's tricky because it was suggested to me that class is both, it's against principles of equality and Christianity, really. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it's a protection that people have used, and that's, protected them, also protected white people protecting me. So my question is, have you noticed issues, because I assume you're on the East Coast, have you noticed issues of class being involved in your work on racism? And if so, because that's the way that can definitely hurt white folks. And have you had any success addressing that issue?
Well, definitely, I would agree with you that they are very intertwined, and have been pretty much from the beginning. And yes, I would also agree with you that it is along the lines of class where white people, what do I want to say? White people who say what privilege are likely to be people who are not part of the 1%, right? They're people who are in any of the other classes that are not the 1%. And so that is a place where they ought to be able to see that, oppressing a group of people is not such a good thing. Look at how, and I'm sorry, I loved the talk that Wakesa gave last week. He said so many brilliant things. And so he talked about that too, that there ought to be the possibility of seeing that I'm being oppressed in this way, which is called class. And I don't like that. That's not good for me and my people. And so maybe I might want to look and see how I'm oppressing others in other ways, namely through my race. When you ask about success, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer right away for how successful are we in dealing with this. I would love to say that, oh, here's the answer to that, Robert.
Well,
I think naming stuff is always a good place to start. Naming. And also, I want to say, be a little bit wary, or I try to be wary, that sometimes what people are doing when they bring up class is they want to shift the conversation. They're getting too uncomfortable talking about race. And it's like, okay, well, it's actually a class issue. Well, maybe that is involved too, but we were talking about race. So let's stay there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Robin, interesting that you would say that, right? Because, I keep a tally on how many people show up to our race talk shows. And usually it's in between 58 and 69, 68. And today the high is 47, right? So I just thought about this going, I wonder if it's because this is a difficult topic for folks to talk about. Just wanted to bring that insight. But I have a question for you, Robert. I mean, not Robert, but Robin. Mm-hmm. What can white people do to help?
Okay, that is a big question.
I got a million of them.
Well, so because it's such a big question, I'm going to at least start by focusing on my topic for today about the price, and talk about how white people can just start working on, as I said, we need to be addressing the ways that we are wounded, to regain our own humanity and to diminish how we go out in the world and visit those wounds on others. So just a quick list of what are some things that occurred to me when I think about how to address my brokenness as a white person. One is to find opportunities to be in caucus groups. So a group of white people who is gathered for the purpose of doing racial justice work. Ideally, a caucus group is part of a larger interracial, cross-racial group, which has caucuses for the white people and caucuses for the people of color. Sometimes you can find that, sometimes you can't, or also called affinity groups, yeah. So a caucus group is a great opportunity for white people to work on some of this difficult stuff that we have buried and unburied within us, without harming and further traumatizing people of color. So I highly recommend that. It's not a caucus group per se, but there are a couple of maybe political groups for white people that might serve a similar purpose. They're Showing Up for Racial Justice, Surge, and there's also European Dissent, which is an outgrowth of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. So those are places where you can work with other white people and work on your stuff. There's also the Reevaluation Counseling, or also known as co-counseling community, and that is a community that offers people tools for emotional health very generally, but they also in particular work on the different oppressions, and they tend to have classes and caucus groups for people working on racial oppression. And very powerful work for retrieving those emotions that we may have long buried but need to work through.
Robin, pardon me. What was the name of
Yeah.
that organization again? Let me put it in the chat.
Oh,
Name
sure.
it again.
It's called Reevaluation Counseling. It's a program of peer counseling. So again, it's not about racial justice, but that is one of the things that they work on in that community. Then my colleague, Robin Schlenger, she's the one who co-leads the Arc of White Womanhood with me. She also has workshops that are called Shame Resilience. I think it's Shame Resilience Skills for White People. Oh, you know what? I was going to pop her address in the chat. I have it here someplace. I'll put that in before we finish. Robin Schlenger. So Shame Resilience workshops, which are a great place to just really dive in and get that stuff cleaned up. I mentioned earlier Resma Menachem, and he has workshops to deal with emotional trauma and grief and healing. And then finally, there's a book. I'll go slow with this in case you want to put it in there. It's called Combined Destinies, Whites Sharing Grief About Racism. And it is just full of stories of white people talking about, as I was saying earlier, coming to that place of realizing, oh my God, I have done harm. I have been messed up. And I want to get past that. So talking about their stories and how they are moving forward from there. And finally, I would say that a thing that white people can do is be anti-racist. If you're working for racial justice, then that, in my experience and in my observation, working for racial justice has been hugely healing to me for my personal wounds. And also it helps to build a new society, to heal our society and grow a new society where everybody can live and thrive in a multiracial, anti-racist, multicultural, everybody is having a good time on earth kind of a community.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Before I ask this one last question, I want to just want to address something that Heidi said in the chat, that she is here today, especially because of this topic. Yes, it's difficult, but critical. And I also want to Seja, thank you so much for writing. It feels interesting, this is Seja Smith speaking. It feels interesting to me to be discussing this in a mixed group, more personally challenging to go deep rather than stay safe. Right. So this is a topic that, yes, it is critically necessary, and it takes courage, right? It takes courage. And here's the thing I know about the Race Talk Revolution family, that we are courageous. If nothing else, we are courageous. Whew, that's why we're here. Robin, I have one question for you. One more. Where did it go, Eugene? It's right here. What would you like the audience to leave with? What would you like us to take away from this conversation?
Well, speaking to the white people, I'm going to repeat, I think, what I said earlier, that I would like you to go away with an understanding that we white people have messed up really bad, and we have been messed up really bad. And we have work to do on both parts, and that it's really crucial that you take the time and the energy and the care and the love of self and the love of community and life to do the work of excavating. Okay, how have I been wounded? How have I been twisted? How have I been injected with internalized racism? and to not get stuck in it, to find, some of those ways that I suggested that you might find to work on this in community. It's really important to not isolate. That's another thing about white culture, teaches us to, do everything by ourselves, rugged individualism. That is not going to work. It is totally not going to work. So, find partners, find other people, and do the work of excavating what's happened that has messed me up, and how am I going to heal that? How am I going to repair, rebuild? How am I going to do better? By the way, I did put in the chat the address for the shame resilience workshops for people who might want to try that out.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to add on to that, because you mentioned self-love. And what I want to say around that is doing that work, my white brothers and sisters, is do not allow the shame or the guilt to keep you from doing the work. Because shame and guilt is not loving yourself, right? Just take a look at what's going on and then dive in. And also, Robin, thank you for saying this, that you don't want to isolate, because healing happens in community. Lane?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. One of the things that people talk about is saying how insane it is that, what's going on. People seem to be losing their sanity, and around, how the vitriol and how forceful these emotions are coming out in all of these very, very hurtful ways, and how insane it is that we can't come together, right, for the healing, because nobody could possibly look at this and say this is normal, like this is good, no, you can't possibly, and it's because, and pardon me, I'm just going to be kind of be my activist self and say, white culture has driven us insane, right? This is insane. Right. And so this is what insanity looks like. And so for us to actually be able to sit with it and really just sit with our own, like, as you say, our own emotions, our own thoughts, our own, and unravel our beliefs and look at what's authentic and where did that come from. And one of the things that Eugene and I are committed to doing is to helping organizations and communities find spaces and create safe spaces to have these type of conversations, right? Because it does require a safe space for people to, because when people say they don't feel safe, when white people say, I don't feel safe talking about racism, it means they don't feel comfortable. It's like, okay, I got that. It's not comfortable and it's safe, right? Nobody, you haven't lost anything. We're just inviting you in. So just to continue to invite people in, right, to these conversations. I love what you said. There's an interesting thing as well, Robin, because, Eugene and I have our platform is very much about unconditional love, right? Bringing people in and loving them up so that we can occur for each other as vulnerable and kind and loving and all of those things that we know we came here as, right, before socialization happened. And you said something to me, and you said, well, here, something about the way white people process the word love is different from the way people of color process the word love. And I found that was profound. And you said white people and people of color come to the table for racial justice for two different things. So we have about, 5 or so minutes. Would you just talk about that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. Jeff Hitchcock, who's one of the founders of CSWAC, is the person who, again, kind of brought this dynamic to my attention. And he labels the dynamic love and justice, love being used in a very broad way. So what he says, and this is what I have observed and experienced to be true. It's been a really important concept to me because it makes so much sense of things. That white people, because we have been historically cut apart from people of color, we have that craving to bond together again. It may be unconscious, it may not be for everybody, but generally speaking, white people do have that craving because we know that we're all humans together here. And so we do want to have connection and relationship. However, because we are steeped in our white supremacy, we don't get it that we can't have connection, we can't have authentic relationship while there is still injustice. Now, people of color also want human relationships and connection, but as the targets of racism, people of color are much more clear that we don't actually have a real friendship here if there isn't justice, if there isn't the striving to create justice. So when we come to the table, a mixed race table, white people are already happy because, oh, I'm at the table with some people of color. I feel good now. I've got connection and relationship happening with people of color. But people of color are sitting there saying, yeah, well, I still am unemployed, undereducated, don't have a house. My kids have been caught up in the mass incarceration system. There's still no justice. So it's really important for white people to recognize that we think and believe, many of us, and especially if we come from a faith community, we're apt to think and believe that, oh, I love everybody, and that's enough. The Beatles said so. Love is all you need. And it would be if we actually knew how to love, but I'm pretty sure most of us are pretty impaired in that department. So so white people need to understand that it's not enough that I simply create a relationship and be in friendship with a person of color. I need to understand what their issues are. I need to be concerned about their well-being. I need to be working for there to be justice for my friend of color.
Yeah, thank you. Martin Luther King talks about beloved community and what it will actually take to create beloved community, right? To change in the quality of our souls and the quantity of our lives, right? Which means we have to do something, right? We can't just sit and, kind of heal and hold
Sing
hands.
kumbaya.
It's nice, but it's not going to change a whole lot of stuff. Not when something is this pervasive and this old and the wounds are this deep. So just thank you very much for what you are bringing. We'd like to have people. Oh, please talk about the two courses that are coming up at CSWAC. Please talk about those real quick.
Yes, thank you. So here's one more cut on an answer to your question, Eugene. What can people do and what can white people do? You can come to our workshops. We have one that's actually starting this evening. It's called Transforming White Organizational Culture. So a deep look at the racism that's embedded in institutions and organizations, and what can someone who is an employee or a member of an organization, what can we do about working for racial justice in those organizations? That one starts tonight. If there's still space, you can still register. And then next month, we will be offering Decentering Whiteness and Building Anti-Racist Multiracial Community. That's actually the mission statement. I forgot to say earlier that it is CSWAC's mission to decenter whiteness and build multiracial anti-racist community. So that's a strategy forward. How do we do those two things, both of which need to happen for a racially just society? So we invite you to come to that. And we have other workshops going on, pretty much one a month at least, so you can check out our website and see what else is there.
Let me also say that in the scheme of things, as workshops go of this type, these are affordable. So I recommend that you take a look, and we will continue to share with you in the resource listing other opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning. So, and thank you, Robin. This has been really incredible. And thank everybody for your questions. I guess we're gonna close out. Wow, that went fast.
Lane, I am noticing Robert's hand up. I don't know if you want to close out anyway, but just wanted to mention.
Robert, I think I'm going to let you have 1 minute, but I'm going to give you 1 minute.
Okay,
like,
it's fast. On the
please.
workshops, are any of them Zoom, or have you considered doing a Zoom workshop?
Oh, yes, they all are on Zoom at this time.
Okay, all
So
right. Thank
Zoom on over.
you. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Robert. Thank you. So Eugene, should I just give my little spiel and then
Yep.
let you close it out? All right, well, here
Yep.
comes the spiel. Thank
Spiel
you
on.
for joining us today. And please join us next week. We're going to talk with Mr. Patrick Shelley. He is working with the Alternatives to Incarceration Project here in Westchester County in New York. And we will be talking about alternatives to incarcerating youth in particular. So things like lengthening the age for youth services, changing some of the housing, some of restorative justice practices, things like that. So if you're someone who is interested, or even if you're not someone who's interested, you're going to be interested because this is going to be a great conversation. So please do come with us. And as usual, we encourage you to continue to engage in conversations with people who are not like you, right? Even though everybody's like you, but people who do not look like you, okay? We continue to ask you to seek out learning and engagement opportunities, okay? We know that elections are happening, our civil rights are at risk, many school boards and local governments around the country are up for grabs, all right? We urge you to stay vigilant and stay active. Eugene.
Again, Robin Alpern, thank you so much. Robin, again, is of the Centers for the Study of White American Culture. And I want to thank you all who have supported us and continue to support us. We appreciate your donations as well as your suggestions for speakers and topics you'd like for us to feature. Now, if you are interested in bringing racial justice conversations to your organization or congregation, please let us know. Lane and I are working on programs around that. We would like to partner with you to create loving, inclusive, and courageous conversations like this one. Now, you know that you can always reach us through our website and our email at info@racetalkrevolution.com. Again, that's info@racetalkrevolution.com.
We would love you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I was going to say the same thing. And as my note says, we're done. We love you. Go ahead, Lane.
You guys love that I give him notes to follow.
I'm telling you.
I can't help myself. He's such a good partner. I can't. That's it. I can't say anything more. I'm done.
I have no more notes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, folks, at Race Talk Revolution. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. Robin Alpern, thank you very much. Centers for the Studies of White American Culture, guys. Check it out. Register for a program. We love you.